too, just because I believe that Ben teaches better when there's a heckler there to keep him on his toes. So that's my intention. I want to be there. Hey, I want to give you a 30-second overview of what I'm just going to be talking about, so that on the off chance that you fall asleep this morning, that's okay. You'll at least get to go home with what the main point is. Today I'm going to give an overview of the entire book of Matthew, all 28 chapters. I was inspired by Dan's sermon last week when he was able to do an entire chapter in one service. I'm going to try doing all 28. I want to try and top him a little bit. So it's a little bit aggressive, but one of the main focuses, though, of this is that I want to really look at this next section that we're about to go into, because it's one of the problematic ones. It's one that, unless you really get a grip on and really see what's going on in it, it can lead you astray for the rest of the book of Matthew. And here it is in an essence. In Matthew, he's presenting to you the kingdom of heaven. And at the beginning, he presents it to you from the perspective of you are outside the kingdom and you are looking at it and seeing what is going on in this kingdom. You're looking at it and you're observing it, you're evaluating it, and you're deciding, is this interesting to me or not? Do I want to be a part of it? And you're looking at it from the outside. And then in the second half of Matthew, you're looking at it from an inside perspective, where he's teaching you how to grow and how to be more like Christ and how to do kingdom business. And in order to make that transition from being an outsider of Jesus' kingdom to becoming an insider and a follower of Jesus, it all comes down to this middle section that we're about to study in the next couple of weeks at this church. And one of the crucial details of this, what's important, what really separates those who are outside from those who are inside, is doubt. Not that they have doubt, but what they do with them. See, believers, people who trust in Jesus, they have doubt. But what they do with their doubt, that's what's important. We all have questions about what God is doing. There are things that God does that just do not make sense to us. And what you do with that is what's important. And so you'll see different models of how people respond to their doubt. And you'll see some people handling it correctly. You'll see some people who are handling it incorrectly. And what you need to do, and you can fall asleep after this, but what you need to do is this. You need to take that doubt, those questions, to God. You take them to Jesus and let him teach you. Okay? That's what you do with your doubt. That's what makes the difference between a believer and an unbeliever, is a believer takes their doubt to Jesus and says, Jesus, I don't understand what's going on. Tell me about this. That's it. Okay, let's get into the text a little bit, but I want to warm up with a story about just ancient maritime traditions. And quite frankly, what does this world come to if you can't believe the stories of a drunken sailor? I mean, they'll tell you about mermaids. They'll tell you about strange mythical beasts that have, like, horns growing out of them. Like, I guess the narwhal actually exists, so maybe that one's true. But when you've got a guy who's sitting off in the corner and he's completely drunk and he's telling you a story about this wave, this enormous, colossal wave that he encountered one day out at sea, on a clear blue day, when the wave came and it was the size of a 10-story building, and you've got these other experienced sailors who are like, yeah, right. For perspective, a 10-story building, seriously, no. During stormy conditions, the ocean, the wave heights will get up to about 20 feet. That's from here to about the ceiling. It's 2 stories. That's under stormy conditions. In the most extreme cases, they've gotten up to 5 stories. That's 50 feet. So this idea of a 10-story building of water coming and just slamming a ship, no way. And then in 1995, January 1st, on a platform out in the North Sea, this is the Dropner platform, recorded a wave on a calm day measuring up to 84 feet high. 84 feet, that's 8 stories. What's more is that it's not just that these giant waves are, hey, here's this wave coming at you. Preceding the wave, there is this, a trough, it's called. It's where the ocean will actually drop down. Because the waves don't just go, hey, up and then back to normal. It's, they go down, they go up, they go down, they go up. And so if you're on an ocean vessel just out on a calm day, and you encounter one of these things, before you hit the wave, you hit the trough. And it's something that's so massive, they call it a hole in the sea. And so already your ship is now pointed down towards the bottom of the sea, almost to tell you where you're headed. And then you get slammed by a 10-story building of water. It's larger than a building because it's an entire wave. It's not just one building. Now, can you imagine the amount of energy that is required in order to lift up that much water from the basic sea level on a calm day? This isn't driven by the winds. It's not driven by the currents either. In 2000, a British oceanographic research vessel encountered one of these things and measured it to be 95 feet high. The pictures that you're seeing are storm conditions. These rogue waves are larger than storms. In fact, what you're looking at right now, that's not a rogue wave, that's just an ocean wave. In fact, most of that's just spray that's been kicked up when a wave hits the shore. An ocean wave is a solid thing. Do you know how much weight that is? Do you know how much energy is required in order to produce these rogue waves? Out of nowhere, no known reason, no known cause. They just occur. What this reminds me is that in as much as I don't understand the supernatural world, I barely understand the natural world. How much more power is at stake when Jesus is able to command the winds and the waves, and then teaches his disciples to do likewise? He has given us the Spirit of God. Based on my prayer life, I have no idea what that means, because I don't even comprehend the natural world, let alone the kind of power that Jesus has given us access to. My prayer life is so small compared to what it could be. I'll leave that as a challenge for you guys. We're going to get into Matthew just a little bit. I don't want to bring up this first slide. I just want to talk a little bit about Matthew. See, Matthew, I love him. He is so organized. I mean, he was an accountant after all, and I guess I'm one of those people that thinks that accountants are cool, but you know what? They can be. I love them. They'll organize everything into spreadsheets, and I can page through the spreadsheets, and I can understand what's going on. They see the world in such black and white terms. And Matthew's just like that. And there's so much that Jesus said, so much that has been written about him. He's offered so many speeches that, as one of his biographers, John, put it, we could fill the world with books about what Jesus has said and what Jesus has done. And what I notice in Matthew is that he actually picks and chooses, and then he organizes things into topics. In fact, I want to kind of show you the entire Gospel of Matthew just in one slide. Here it is. That's all the text in Matthew, right there. All 28 chapters in one-point font. So I want to apologize to you guys here in the back row, but the point of this isn't to read the words. This may be the only time in your life that you'll have the entire text of Matthew out in front of you. But the point of this is I want to show you how Matthew has organized this. You notice that there's kind of 5 columns where the top of the column is black and then the bottom of the column is red. Well, guess what the red text is? It's Jesus just making a speech. So that's Jesus talking, and then right before Jesus talking, you have a couple of chapters about Jesus doing things. And so that cycle repeats in his gospel. Jesus does things, then he talks. Jesus does things, then he talks. And Matthew does this 5 times over. In fact, one of the speeches, the one that we just looked at last week, Jesus never gave. He did, but he gave 2 different speeches, and Matthew takes those 2 and he puts them together because he likes to arrange things topically. That's what he's doing. So you'll notice Jesus is doing things, then speech. Jesus is doing things, then speech. And if that wasn't enough of an emphasis, Matthew also has this strange phrase, this one phrase that just keeps coming up over and over in his gospel. 5 times over, Matthew has this one phrase after Jesus finished saying these things. The same 6 words all in a row, which usually anyone who writes and is that repetitive, you're either 4 years old, well, maybe you're not writing at that point, but that's the thing. It's so childish. It's something that we just naturally have an aversion to unless someone is being repetitive intentionally, unless someone is being repetitive intentionally. And if that's the case, then they're actually trying to call attention to something. So what is it that Matthew might be trying to call our attention to? Perhaps the things that Jesus just said? I don't know, just shot in the dark right there. Yeah, that's exactly what Matthew's doing. He's basically taken 5 of Jesus' big speeches and said, hey, these are important. This is what I want you to know. So here's these 5 topics. We're going to look at them. We're going to figure out what's going on. And then that 6th column, you'll notice there's a 6th column there. It's all black text. It's all Jesus doing things. That's Jesus saving the world. So you've got 5 lessons from Jesus, and then Jesus saves the world. And that's the book of Matthew in a nutshell. So I'm kind of curious as to what are these topics? Why would Matthew pick these 5 particular topics? Is there some kind of correlation between them, what's going on in them, and how do they relate to the text before them? Well, I want to start with the first section, this first speech. It's Matthew chapters 5 through 7. This is what's known as the Sermon on the Mount. This is where Jesus describes what his kingdom is like. What is life like in his kingdom? How is it different than the rest of the world? How do we approach our king? How do we do things in this kingdom? What's it like? Well, here's the thing. Without Matthew chapters 1 through 4, you just have Jesus talking. You have no idea who Jesus even is, in fact, at this point. You just have a guy getting up and talking about maybe his theories about an idealistic society. This has happened before. Plato wrote A Republic, where he described, hey, here's what I think life could be like. Thomas More wrote A Utopian Society. A lot of guys have written things about what they think an ideal society would be like, so that you may take these and say, let's reshape our society this way. And you can kind of pick and choose through these things and decide, almost like an academic research paper. It's kind of boring, yeah. But with Matthew chapter 1 through 4, it frames it very differently, because the entire point of Matthew chapters 1 through 4 is Matthew is showing you from all kinds of different angles, through Jesus' genealogy, through foreign dignitaries, by comparison, in all kinds of different angles, he is showing us this one unequivocal truth, that Jesus is a king sent from heaven. He's the Messiah. That's what Messiah means, essentially, is that he's the king anointed from heaven. He has God's authority to be king here on earth. He's literally bringing heaven to earth in the shape of a kingdom. And once you know that Jesus is king, then you look at Matthew 5 through 7, and it's no longer just an academic paper to be considered. Now it is the law. And if you want to be a part of the kingdom, then you will obey the law. You see how the context kind of shapes the speech. And that's exactly what happens throughout Matthew's pattern, is he selects stories about Jesus that give us the context that we need in order for the speech. So in the next section, this is Matthew chapters 8 through 10, you have 2 chapters of Jesus doing just awesome things. What he's doing is, at the moment, he's the only one who's really part of the kingdom. And he's going out and he's reshaping the world into the image of the kingdom. He goes up to sick people and he heals them. He calms down nature. He's reshaping the world into the kingdom. That's what the kingdom does. It's an aggressively growing thing. As it encounters the world, it will reshape the world into its image. As you encounter Jesus, he will reshape you into his image unless you run away from it. So that's the context for Matthew chapter 10, when Jesus sends out his disciples. Now they're going to go out and do the exact same thing. What you're seeing is that the kingdom is growing. So the first section, you're learning about the essentials of the kingdom. Who the king is, what the law is. This is what life's like in the kingdom. In the next section, you see the kingdom growing. It's expanding. It's taking over. Middle section. I'm going to skip for a moment. I'll come back to that. Fourth section. Chapters 14 through 18. You have Jesus interacting with the disciples, just in close proximity. He is teaching and training them how to become leaders in his kingdom. And the speech begins with Jesus answering the question about who is greatest in the kingdom. This whole section is on leadership training. It's on becoming more like Jesus. No, you're not just a believer in Jesus, you are actually living it out. You're doing like him, and he's teaching you how to do that. And then that fifth section, this is what to do as a group, as a kingdom. This is what our mission is, because right after this, Jesus is going to go. He's going to take off. And he's leaving behind a kingdom. So what does the kingdom do in his absence? Well, that's what he's going to cover here in chapters 19 through 25. He's going to let you know what the mission and purpose of this kingdom is. What is it that we're going to do? The first two sections, you have a very outsider-like perspective. You're looking at it from the outside. You're learning about what it's like, but you're observing it from the outside. The last two sections, you're looking at it from an insider perspective. How do I grow within the kingdom? What do we do now as the kingdom? So this middle section makes that transition from being outsider to being insider. And one of the things I love is that the middle speech, chapter 13, Matthew throws in one of these random details about a house, which has literally no bearing on the rest of the speech. It starts off where Jesus is outside the house. Matthew doesn't say what house. It doesn't really matter. The house is symbolic of the kingdom. He's there with the disciples. Everyone's outside the kingdom. Everyone's outside the house. And then at the halfway point of the speech, they step into the house. What house? Doesn't matter. It's symbolic of the kingdom. You see that Jesus is entering into the kingdom. He's bringing his disciples with him. They go into the house. And that's what's happening in that speech. Now, the speech is one it's a confusing speech. Jesus actually admits, I was intentionally confusing. Which kind of leaves us in a little bit high ground. It's like, aren't you supposed to be a teacher? Aren't you supposed to, make things clear for us? Aren't you supposed to help us along? Yes and no. This whole middle section all deals with, what do you do with your confusion, with your doubt, with your, hey God, this doesn't make sense. What do you do with that? Because quite frankly, you're not going to ever get everything all figured out. It's just not going to happen. You can spend an entire lifetime studying God and learning about his kingdom. You could spend several lifetimes. The entire human race can spend all of our time, and we still will not get it figured out. Isn't that a good thing? That we won't be able to get God so figured out? That we can pursue him with all of our lives and with all of our eternities, and we'll still have questions? I find that a good thing. And the issue is, what do you do with your questions? And you're going to see four different maybe five, depending on how you count them, but you're going to see a couple of different responses in this next section. It's going to start off with John the Baptist doing things right. He's in prison, and he's expecting Jesus to be the Messiah. And one of the expectations is the Messiah frees prisoners. He's kind of got some skin in this game, doesn't he? He's got an execution scheduled, and he's wondering, hey, Jesus, I know the Messiah is supposed to release prisoners. Are you going to do that anytime soon? Well, yes, he is the Messiah, but it's not quite what you're expecting. And by the way, John the Baptist, you are going to die. John the Baptist takes his question to Jesus. Well, he can't leave prison, but he sends messengers. He sends them to Jesus. On the other hand, you've got religious teachers, and they've heard what Jesus has been saying, and this doesn't make sense from what they know and what they believe about what the Messianic kingdom is supposed to be like. And they're listening to Jesus, and they're like, no, Jesus, this is wrong. What you're doing, what you're saying, no. I disagree. And what they're doing is they come to Jesus with their questions, but not really. They're not looking for his answers. They're not looking for him to resolve this. They're actually trying to shame him with these questions. They're trying to point out using some kind of rhetorical device about how Jesus is foolish. And they do it rather poorly, but that's what they're trying to do. They're coming to Jesus in a state of arrogance. Don't trust religious teachers, seriously. I realize the irony of me saying that right here, but anyways. You also have the crowds. They're hearing Jesus' stories, and things are not clicking, and they're confused, and they're like, I don't get it. Jesus, I don't get it, and they walk away. And then you've got these cities, Chorazin and Bethsaida, and they just won't even listen to Jesus. They won't give him the time of day. And then you've got the disciples. They do it right. Now, they have doubt. They have questions. They probably don't even understand this speech in Matthew chapter 13. They don't understand what he's talking about. But what they do is they go with Jesus into the house. They follow him, and they bring their questions, and they just say, hey, Jesus, that story about the sower, we don't get it. The parable about the pearl, we don't understand this. Can you explain it to us? That's a good model for a believer. You take your question to Jesus and say, hey, Jesus, can you explain it to us? That's what we're called to do, is we're supposed to be shaped in the image of God's mystery instead of coming to God and saying, hey, God, here's how I think you should run your kingdom. Why don't we allow our view and our understanding of the world to be shaped by God instead of the other way around? So that's Matthew in a nutshell. That's the 5 sections. And you notice that there's a little bit of a progression going on there. We start off with that foundation. We see the kingdom grow, and now it encounters us. And we're at a point where we have to make a decision. Do we step into the kingdom, or do we go away? If you choose wrong, if you say, hey, that stuff that you talked about doesn't make sense to me. The going out and talking to neighbors, that doesn't make any sense to me. The being obedient to your law, there's parts of that I have issue with. If you handle that incorrectly, and you walk away from Jesus, then the rest of Matthew has no bearing. Teaching you how to be great in the kingdom has no bearing if you're not even willing to step into the kingdom. Everything after this hinges on how we respond. And that's what we're going to be looking at in the next couple of weeks, is just how people respond to Jesus. Now, one of the things is, I've noticed all the commentaries seem to get this section wrong. They all describe this as the opposition to Jesus. And the thing is, this is the centerpiece of Matthew's gospel. This is the most important question, is what are you going to do with your doubts? Based on how you handle that, you're either in the kingdom or you're out. And all the commentaries are saying, no, this section is all about the opposition to Jesus, the reaction, the rejection of Jesus was one of the things. As though somehow Jesus has now stepped off of center stage in his own gospel, and we're putting now the opponents, the Pharisees, center stage. No, that's not what's going on. What's going on is how you handle your doubts. And what I notice across these different groups is the people who have the most to lose tend to be the ones who follow Jesus. John the Baptist died. He had to sacrifice greatly. The disciples lost great honor with the crowds because they stayed committed to Jesus. On the other hand, the people who had the most to gain, the crowds, were going to have their entire society reshaped into the image of heaven. The religious teachers, if they had embraced Jesus, do you know how the crowds would have come to them saying, hey, teach us about this new kingdom? Attendance at the synagogue would have spiked. The people who had the most to gain end up rejecting Jesus. The people who ended up having to sacrifice much, those are the ones who followed Jesus. I find that interesting. I find that challenging a little bit too. One of my guilty pleasures is I love just nature documentaries. My wife and I enjoy watching tornado videos together, especially the shaky cam of someone just watching the tornado because it happens to be near them. And inevitably, these tornado videos always end up coming into one of 2 categories. One is you've got someone who's got their camera pointed at the tornado and they're watching just in awe of this powerful force of nature just go by, and they're just beholding this thing. And it's amazing. And then you've got the second type of videos. And these are ones that think they're the first kind of videos. And they're watching this tornado, and they're recording it as it goes by, and then they realize that it's not going by, it's coming towards them. And there's this moment of panic where you realize that this powerful force of nature that is about to reshape life as you know it, you're no longer just an observer of this. You are about to become a participant with this tornado. What are you going to do? And you see this panic panic moment in the person's eyes. And they always say things like, oh, hang on, this is family friendly. Oh no, that's what they say. Oh no. Yeah. And of course, nothing else. And they run because they know that if they just stay put, their house is about to be reshaped into the image of this tornado. Here they've been an outside observer to this powerful thing. And they have to make a decision. They're at this crisis point. And how they handle this decision is going to change the next couple of years or the next couple of seconds, depending on how it shapes out. And that's exactly what's been going on in the text. We've been watching the kingdom of heaven unfold from an outsider. We've seen the king. We've seen his law. We've seen how it interacts with society. We've seen Jesus send his disciples out. And guess what? They're knocking at your door. You know what the second most common phrase is in the book of Matthew? It's the description of the kingdom. It's this: the kingdom of heaven is at hand. I want you guys to reach out with your right hand. Go ahead. Straight in front of you. Everyone do it. Reach the chair in front of you. Notice what's at hand. There's a chair. Touch your knee. Touch your neighbor nicely. These are things that are at hand. See, we often hear this description of this kingdom as though it's some kind of strange idea. It's not. It's very tangible. It's right here. It's at least as tangible as Iowa is. It's here. It is a present reality, just as present as your neighbor is, just as present as your face is. The kingdom is right here. It's not something that was there for 3 years while Jesus was on earth. No. It continued on even after he left. You know who runs the kingdom now? It's the Holy Spirit. That's why there's no centralized kingdom, because everyone has the Holy Spirit in them. Everyone who's a citizen of this kingdom is being led by God directly from the Holy Spirit. It is at hand. It is a present reality. It is right here. So it's at your doorstep, and the question is, are you going to allow your household to be reshaped into the image of this kingdom? This isn't something that you're going to have all figured out before you can make a decision. You're going to bring your confusion, your doubt, your questions, you're going to bring them to Jesus, and that's how you enter in. If that's interesting to you, we can talk about it afterwards. Better yet, talk to Jesus about it. I wouldn't mind being a part of the conversation, but that's who you should be taking your questions to. That's how you step into the kingdom. And what we're going to be looking at in the next couple of weeks is just people responding well and people responding poorly with their confusion, their doubts, and their questions. And then after that, this fall, the church is going to be doing something very new, very interesting. We're actually training up people to be disciples. We're following the text, essentially, but we're looking at, hey, Jesus taught up and trained up disciples. Why don't we? And Dan's going to tell you about that a little bit at the end of this worship time. He's got something really exciting after service today. It'll just be a 15-minute announcement. If you guys are interested, please stay for it. It'll be very cool. But it's getting into that training up disciples and training up being a leader in this kingdom. And that's going to be starting this fall. So I encourage you guys to be a part of that. Join his kingdom. Take your doubts. Take them to Jesus. Let him reshape you. Enter into his kingdom. Let's worship.